as the acting chairperson. Thank you.
Okay. Member Mitchell, you are now the chairperson. Thank you very much. Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kamish Ahmad. Good afternoon, members. I will go straight over to the apologies. I've received the apology as submitted by the procedural officer for Honourable Mackenzie. Are there any further apologies?
Chairperson Regan Allen, even though the meeting request was extended to members serving on the Community Safety Standing Committee, I would want to submit an apology for Lorraine Botha.
Thank you, Honourable Allen. Apology noted. Are there any further apologies? Ms. Kamish Ahmad?
No, Chairperson.
Oh, your hand was up. Let me just lower your hand. Okay. If not, thank you very Honourable Murray. I see your hand.
Congratulations, Honourable Mitchell, on your appointment as chairperson of this august meeting.
Thank you very much, Honourable Murray. But just for the record, I'm the acting chairperson for this meeting.
With full powers of the real chairman.
Thank you very much, Honourable Murray. Members, before I go over to allowing you to introduce yourself for the record, can I just alert you to the rules of engagement for this meeting? As per Rule 2.1 and 2.4, all members will be muted at the beginning of the meeting to avoid any background noises. In the event that you would like to raise any points of order during the meeting, please use the chat functions of the MS Teams. All video and audio must please be switched off to improve the quality of the connection during the meeting. However, if you are speaking, you are more than welcome to put on your video during that presentation, and as soon as you are done, to please switch off all microphones and the video, and that's just to make sure that the connection is upheld during this meeting. Just want to, for the record, state that this meeting is also broadcast live on YouTube. Members, I'm going to allow you an opportunity to introduce yourselves, and I'm going to start with Honourable Murray because your hand is still raised.
I'm Peter Murray, Freedom Front Plus. And I just want to bring to the chairman's attention that the hand is working, but the chat channel is not working. So if I want to say something, am I allowed to just indicate by raising my hand?
Yes, absolutely, Honourable Murray. I will follow that. All right, members, you can now introduce yourself.
Chairperson Wendy Philander.
Thank you very much, Honourable Philander.
Chairperson Regan Allen.
Thank you, Honourable Allen.
Chairperson Mesuli Kama.
Thank you, Honourable Nkama.
Brett Heron.
Thank you, Honourable Heron. Are there any other members in this?
Wenger.
Thank you, Honourable Wenger. Are there any other members in this meeting? All right. If not, I see the Premier has joined, as well as Minister Fritz. Good afternoon, Premier. Good afternoon, Minister. I'm not going to, at this stage, allow the departmental officials to introduce yourselves. I will give you an opportunity before you speak to just indicate who you are and in what capacity you are responding. I'm going to go straight over to the first item on the agenda. I've been informed that this is a follow-up from a previous briefing that was made to the Standing Committee on Premier and Constitutional Matters. So I'm going to go straight over to Premier if you have any introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, Harry Malila has asked that he'll join as soon as he can. He's just still in a meeting with the Department of Health and the National Treasury as DG. Did you want us to just first introduce all the officials that's in the team?
No, Premier, if you could, I'm going to allow the officials to introduce themselves when they make contribution to the meeting. I'm going to allow you an opportunity if you would like to make any introductory remarks before we go over to the actual presentation.
Okay. No, I don't need to make any further introductory remarks. I know that Minister Fritz is also here, so I mean he might want to say one or two words. And obviously, with regards to the safety plan, COVID-19 came along, and there was also a redeployment. But even as close as just today, we're having further discussions. As we can see, we're going to need to bring this team back in, specifically to some of the gang-infested hotspot areas, which are now coming back quite quickly. But I think that the presentation is there, and we'll go through the presentation and deal with the questions afterwards.
Thank you very much, Premier. Honourable Minister, is there any introductory remark from your side?
No, thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, Premier. Afternoon, Honourable Marais, specifically. At this point, Mr. Chairman, no, I'm in the hands. I'm quite comfortable with the comments, the Premier. I'm completely covered by the Premier. And I think the Premier will be able to continue with the presentation immediately. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you, Minister. I have seen that the DG has joined us. DG, do you want to make any introductory remarks, or are we going straight into the presentation?
Chair, thank you very much, and also good afternoon to all the members. You've made the point to say this is a follow-on meeting. You may recall myself and the Premier appeared before this committee. It was about 4 months or so back, where we've actually outlined the entire safety plan. The purpose today is actually to give you an update on what we've done. And in addition to that, what we've seen actually post the lockdown is actually what is happening, particularly within the safety space, both on the health front, as well as also what is happening, particularly in our communities as far as it relates to the murder rate. And the connections, particularly between the use of alcohol and what we see at our emergency centers, vis-a-vis what we're also seeing, happening in the mortuaries and stuff like that. So we thought that just instead of only taking you through our own initiatives, we also want to just give you an update so that you can see why the safety plan is so important for this province and why the safety plan is so important to work, because it impacts communities, it impacts our health system, and it also, in fact, impacts the entire delivery system of government. So you will see, Chair, the presentation today, Dr. Hildegard Fast will start and lead on it. And then Gideon Morris, who's the HOD for the Department of Community Safety, will also comment, and then Dr. Hildegard Fast will just end. So it's important for the committee to understand, why safety is our #1 priority in this government. And notwithstanding COVID and the current tension on COVID and the fight against COVID, as the Premier has indicated, we should not forget about the implications, we should actually remember about the implications and why we have a safety plan and what it is that we actually want to achieve, notwithstanding, I think, the constrained environment that we work in. Chair, so if you're okay, you can hand over to Dr. Fast and Gideon, who will jointly take us through it, and we will gladly respond to any questions that the committee may have. Thanks.
Thank you very much, DG, for that introductory remarks. Members, I'm going to go straight and hand over to Dr. Fast to take us through the presentation. Can I just ask, from a procedural point of view, is there somebody that's going to assist with the presentation on the screens?
Yes, Chairperson. Lizette will flight the presentation.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Fast, over to you. Welcome.
Great, thanks very much, and good afternoon to everybody. So HOD Morris and myself will take you through the presentation and just give you an update. So the first thing that I wanted to just indicate to you is that the first few slides is just to refresh our minds about what the safety plan is about. Most of you would have seen this before, so apologies if it's a repetition, but I think it's really important to sketch the context in which the safety plan was actually developed. I'm going to go very quickly through those slides and then start to tell you what the latest is with respect to the safety plan and our plans to adapt to the current COVID reality. So if we can go to the next slide. So this is our provincial strategic plan overall, and you can see that the safety plan is central to that. So you see our vision is a safe Western Cape where everyone prospers. And we have the 3 vision-inspired priorities, but you see that the safety priority in the light blue basically envelops the majority of the work that we do as a province. So safety is really a theme that cross-cuts through everything. Next slide. So there's 2 major legs to this. Previously, well, generally speaking, throughout the world, there is a sense that that safety is about enforcement, law enforcement. It's very interesting now to see with the protests in the U.S. The very misleading term about defunding the police, which in fact is about reducing violence and putting money into social services. So it's a debate that's now raging worldwide, which is saying enhanced enforcement is great, but at the end of the day, if you don't tackle the fundamental issues in society, then you're not actually going to have a long-term impact on safety in society. Next slide. So we do that through improved policing, as well as addressing the risk factors of violence. What does that do? We do it through 3 different approaches: area-based approaches, which I'll come to just now, improved partnerships, and very importantly, use of data and evidence. And you'll, I hope you're happy to know that during the lockdown, it's very difficult to do research on the ground, but we have been able to do extensive research to start building an evidence base for the sort of activities that we need to be involved in with respect to both law enforcement and violence prevention. And that will then reduce crime, and the objective is to halve the murder rate in the next 10 years. Rather ambitious, but we believe it can be done. Next slide. So how is it different from previous strategies? I indicated that violence prevention is now added onto policing to reach the goal of crime reduction. We know that we have to have them going hand in hand. So it's not just doing both, it's the fact that they actually need to be integrated with each other. And it requires a commitment to longer term interventions. This is not just a 2, 3, 5-year program. This is a long-term program that requires commitment of all the partners. It is an area-based approach and multi-agency. So there are, sorry, back up to the previous slide. There we go. It's an area-based. I'm just going to wait to get a little bit of stability on this presentation. Okay, I'm still looking for the previous slide.
Today, Dr. Fast, can you hear me, Dr. Fast? You are taking control of the presentation, that is why. So I'm going to take control of the presentation and I'll just do the slides.
Okay, great, thanks. Thanks, Wasim. Or Lizette, sorry. Okay, so it's area-based. There's the whole of society approach. The city has the MERP, and it's about saying if we don't work together with absolutely everybody, and that includes also communities. And lastly, it will identify and implement strategies based upon the evidence. If these strategies don't result in less crime, then we will try different strategies. So the idea is you have a piece of evidence that says, oh, you know, we think that if in a particular area, you have a particular strategy because we notice that there are a lot of muggings at a particular intersection. Perhaps if we use a certain strategy, it will stop it. You try the strategy. If it doesn't work, then you try another strategy. So it's iterative, it's agile, it's very flexible. Next slide. So there are two focus areas: violence prevention and law enforcement, as I indicated, 3 spheres of intervention, 13 departments, 21 safety priorities, and the overall goal. I just want to make a comment about the budgetary allocations, is that we, this year as a province, it's very unusual that we are having, in fact, 2 adjusted budget adjustment processes. The one will be in July, the next will be in November for very obvious reasons. And as a result, we have had to shift a lot of activities towards COVID. Some of that has been of a law enforcement nature, and some of it has not. And so as a result, at this point in time, we can't give you an exact sense of what the budgetary allocations are that have been spent to date, or will be in the next 6 to 12 months. And if we get to the next slide, this is the list of all the different interventions. Now, as you look at this list of interventions, I want you to ask yourself the question, if you're running one of these programs in the province, how do you think COVID would affect that particular program? So let me give you an example. Reduce violence on school grounds. Well, there's a certain program, there are school resource officers that drop the violence rate. But clearly, we're in a very different situation now in COVID, so that would be less relevant perhaps for a few months. Expand Chrysalis Academy support to teachers. Well, if we're not running training colleges and you can't do it all online, then this might also be affected. If you go over to the spatial sphere in terms of improving road safety, that would also have implications in terms of making sure all the road workers are have the necessary PPE. And I could go on. Improve tourism safety is a really good example. I mean, we have no tourists. And we really hope we get some of them back, but we have our doubts throughout the world. Everyone's bracing themselves. So I'm saying this because when we're asked about, well, how far are you with all of the different safety priorities, very clearly, every single one of them is affected by COVID. It will affect the amount of money we spend. It will affect the rollout, and it will affect, it may affect our plans for next year also. So we're in a very flexible environment fluid environment, I should say rather, where things are changing all the time. And it requires us to take stock of where we are and be ready to change plans at any time. Next slide. How we've kept progress so far is through the Safety Cabinet. You see an idea of the dashboard there. You see who's on the Safety Cabinet, so it's the province. It's the Commissioner of Police in the Western Cape. It's also the city, represented by the Mayor, the Alderman, and the ED for community safety, or rather for safety and security. We have also invited Justice, the State Security Agency, and Correctional Services. And I'm happy to say that at the first meeting that took place on the 19th of February, all were present, and we were able to have a positive discussion. You can see the dashboard at the top there on the right, how we're going to start keeping track. We'll be taking all the crime statistics from the past, comparing them to the present, and seeing whether or not we're actually making progress. So the whole point about the Safety Cabinet is that it is all the major role players from national, provincial, local government, that we hold each other accountable in terms of all the indicators that we've established. Next slide. This is my last slide for a while. I just want to say what our area-based approach is to the safety plan. The first is that there are 50% of all murders, it's actually just over 50%, take place in the same areas. You see them all listed there. I will not call them out. What's interesting is that in terms of the crime trends that we found under lockdown, that really hasn't changed very much at all. The nature of it may have changed. It's decreased, yes, but basically the pattern of violence and murders is still consistent across the province. So we're taking an area-based approach and particularly focusing there and seeing what we learn there that can be applied elsewhere. Who's on it? Well, there's going to be an area-based team established in each crime area. We had already gotten all the names of the SAPs and the city and province and so forth to put on these area-based teams when COVID hit. There are going to be additional law enforcement officers in each area, and we're going to be building on the very strong partnership that exists. So we're in constant touch with our two major stakeholders, the city and SAPs, on a range of issues around data and evidence and policing and the the use of the LEAP officers at the moment for COVID purposes. So it's a growing partnership. How will we do it? It'll be very, very strongly data-led. So we are collecting as much information as we can. We've done research under the lockdown, and we'll continue to try to use evidence all the time. As I indicated previously, it's going to be a constant process of assessing, learning, adjusting, assessing, learning, adjusting. So there's no such thing. Every area is different. You will find that some of those areas I just listed above are gangster areas primarily, and they will have a very particular way in which you approach those problems. You have other areas which don't have as many gangs, and they have different sorts of violence. They may have more street robberies, as an example. So you have to take a different approach in every single area and experiment, and then get better and better as you go along. I'm now going to hand over to Mr. Morris, who's going to take us through the slides on the LEAP deployment. Over to you, Gideon.
Good afternoon, Chairperson and honourable members. Let me also acknowledge the presence of the Premier and the Minister. Also for the record, Chair, if I can just state that the department is represented by myself, Advocate Yashina Pillay, as well as Mr. Trevor Wingrove, who is the Director and the budget holder for this particular part of the safety plan. And if you don't mind, Chair, I'll switch off the camera in terms of signal quality. The first slide, Chairperson, is an illustration of the progress we've made, as well as the annual cycle of this project. It is underpinned then by a transfer payment agreement that is signed between the Department of Community Safety and the City of Cape Town. The inaugural TPA, as we commonly refer to this, was signed in February 2020, and 130 million rand was transferred to the city, and we have seen that the first 500 law enforcement officials have been appointed and they have assumed duty. That then goes to the second block, the areas of deployment that we'll illustrate it later, Chairperson. They started with the deployment in the murder stations, but then it was disrupted because of the COVID-19 deployments. And by agreement with the Premier and the Provincial Commissioner, the deployments happened through the structures of the National JOCS, Joint Operational Command, as well as then the Provincial Joint Operational Command, and in consultation with SAPS in order to deal with the COVID-19 regulations. Then, in terms of reporting, Chairperson, it is a requirement of the transfer payment agreement that the city will report to us weekly in terms of deployments and targets and number of arrests, the detail of which we'll unpack a bit later. And there's also quarterly expenditure reports. So the expenditure thus far, the 130 million, happened in the previous financial year. Chairperson, as you also know, the financial years of the city and the province is not fully aligned. So we are waiting for reconciliation of last year's expenditure, and we are now in the process of working on the TPA and the business plan for this financial year. And then in the last block then, Chair, but this is a cycle that will have to be repeated on an annual year, but it also leads and gives us the opportunity to learn and to improve on the requirement of a new business plan having to be drafted annually. Next slide, please. Chair, this is just setting out the numbers. So last financial year, the first column, 2019-20 at the top, we've seen that the 500 law enforcement officers were appointed, trained and deployed. The total cost of that before reconciliation was 169.8 million, of which the city contributed 39.8 million and the province contributed 130 million. For this financial year, Chair, 2021, it's a requirement for the appointment, training and deployment of an additional 500 learner law enforcement officers. which will bring the cumulative total to 1,000. And the estimated cost this year is 557.7 million. Chair, of course, we are mindful that this cost may be influenced by the delays in training and appointment. We are in conversations with the city about that now, but these are the most accurate figures that we have to work with now. So of that 157 million, the city will contribute 140 million, and the province will contribute 417 million rand. The outer years, Chair, these are the figures that's already captured in our multi-term expenditure framework. So as we go into next year, then it becomes maintaining those 1,000 law enforcement officers. There's no being added afterwards. And the cost would then be, as you see, 496 million, 525 million for the 2 years respectively, of which the city will contribute in total 452 million, and the province will contribute 1.2797 billion. Next slide. Chairperson, this is just in a high-level report. As already said, the deployment of the law enforcement officers were adapted to be linked with COVID-19, and we have also done research to understand the shift in crime and violence during the lockdown, and in particular then the impact on the sale and increasingly important, Chair, the transport of alcohol on violence, and then underreporting of domestic violence. Next slide. Chairperson, this is just an illustration of the information we get from the city. This is then also generated through the system that they call the EPIC. It's the Emergency Personnel Integrated Command System, and it gives us information on the deployment numbers of the 500 law enforcement officers to the different areas of deployment, and then also for the different days of the week. So you'll see that during this particular time, 13 to 24 of May, there was a lot of focus on the safety and the security of the number of homeless people that were accommodated at Strandfontein, and that's where the deployments were then done. I need to again emphasize, Chairperson, that these deployments are done in consultation with the Provincial Joint Command Centre. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Chairperson, I don't know, I don't see the slides being changed. Oh, one back, please. Okay, Chairperson, the slide, the previous slide, just then gives us a breakdown again of the deployments currently, which is aligned with the medical determined hotspots. Now, I think it's just important to briefly reflect on the fact that the crime hotspots, Chairperson, are not necessarily aligned with the medical hotspots. Okay, next slide, please, if we can. So there you'll see, Chairperson, those are the medical hotspots in terms of the COVID infections, and these are then the deployments aligned to those areas. Next slide, please. Chairperson, this is just a high-level introduction to the topic of the research that Dr. Fast and the Premier spoke about in the introductory remarks. So we have seen an overall decline or decrease of 46.8% in homicides in the province. This is based, Chairperson, on the mortality data, which we know we can present to you with a confidence level of 95% or more. But I think it's also important, and Minister Fritz will attest to this, is that the Provincial Commissioner in the MINMEC meeting with the National Minister Kele on Monday again confirmed the decrease, as well as the impact we've seen with the alcohol sales. So the next one, Chairperson, is gun violence remains prevalent. Sorry, if my mistake, if we can go back one. It's difficult to identify single contributing factors to the decrease in violence and crime. Chair, we are all mindful of the fact that during this period of time, we have also seen about 3,000 parolees released back into our communities. There has been many contributing factors that could have contributed to either the decrease or the increase in the crime. The telephonic interviews were done in consult or in partnership with the Institute of Security Studies with stakeholders living and working in Khayelitsha, Del Philippi, and it was included the law enforcement officials. We spoke to the Western Cape government officials staying in those areas, NGOs, and station commanders. Next slide, please. Chairperson, this is then the next slide. It gives you a behavior over time graph of the number of murders, and this is then measured from the mortuary data. The blue line is the figures for the same period of time in 2019. The orange line is the figures for this year. And then, Chairperson, at the bottom, you'll see the numbers per week of the year. So the vertical line indicated level 5 that started around about end of week 13, 14. That's when the lockdown started, level 5, and we saw a very sharp decrease in the number of murders. That then continued. We saw an increase in between week 17 and 18. We'll speak about those again. And that's just before level 4 then came in. And I think our biggest concern, Chair, that when you look at level 3, the introduction at the end of week 22, we have seen that the number of murders almost immediately picked up to the high levels of previous years. If we can go to the next slide, please. Chairperson, this is then the murders in the priority stations. These are the murder stations as they are commonly referred to. And you'll see that there's a much smaller deviation other than, of course, week 13, 14, when there was a total lockdown and on movement of people as well. But once the movement was allowed, we saw that picked up quicker and it basically stayed the same as the previous years. Let's go to the next slide. Chairperson, I think this is very important. When we look at the circumstances of homicide or murders, we have the two tables. The one is then for 2019, comparative over the same period of time, and then on the right hand is the 2020. So when we look at the number of people that died by firearms last year, it stood at 52%. This year, so far, it is at 73%, but I think it's very important here that we understand that that is not because we had more murders by firearm, it's just that they are more in comparison to the total number. Then the number of murders or recorded for stabbing is then significantly reduced from 35% to 9.8%. And other murders, which is mostly by blunt object, that stayed about the same. And I think also, Chair, we know that there's a very strong statistical and well-researched correlation between murders by sharp object, which is stabbing, and alcohol abuse. Next slide, please. Chairperson, that's just then basically a summary. So we've seen a significant reduction in violent crime and trauma admissions at the hospitals under Alert 5 and 4. This is also then confirmed by the Department of Health. We'll share that with you. There is no single contributing factor. We acknowledge that to the decrease in violence and crime. The association between alcohol and violent behavioral is, however, well established. This, of course, and the Premier has already started the project, but it gives us a unique opportunity then also to look at the harms caused by alcohol again, especially through the lens of a whole of society approach. And we are looking at then the regulations around the sale. And if I can again emphasize that the transport of alcohol, because especially the illegal outlets were much more affected by the ban on transport than necessarily the sale, because they sell in any case illegally. Then the idea is also then to look at a strategy of a targeted policing on illegal alcohol sale and again transport, and address the problematic alcohol behavior and associated activities. Next slide. Chairperson, this is just stats that we got from the Department of Health. And again, this speaks to admissions to the trauma centers or the emergency centers at our hospitals. And again, it gives you the 3 slides, I think are the 3 graphs. The middle one is most important. So as we saw a reduction in the number of murders recorded at our mortuaries, we similarly saw during that period of time a sharp decrease in the number of people admitted to the trauma units at our hospitals. Then the next slide, this is my last slide before Dr. Rifast will take over again. Chairperson, that just confirms some of the facts that we know. Of all the unnatural deaths in the province, about 51% of them are murders or homicides. 80% of those are male victims. 60% of them are young people between the ages of 20 to 39. And it is then a verified that 50% of those homicide victims had alcohol abuse, 60% of all pedestrian fatalities, 47% of motor vehicle fatalities, 65 fire fatalities, and then 47% of all drownings tested positive for alcohol. Chairperson, I thank you. I hand over back to Dr. Fast.
Thanks. I'm going to be taking you through 2 slides on gender-based violence during lockdown. So it's been reported by the police that the number of reported gender-based violence cases reported to them has dropped by 65% during lockdown. Now, we might think that's good news, but it's very difficult to interpret whether that means that there is less violence or whether or not women and children are less likely to go and report it. So the findings that we have established in working with NGOs is that women are more likely to report to NGOs, SAPs, or use informal channels rather than to contact the National Command Center. Whether they have done so during lockdown, there's a number of barriers. So firstly, basic needs come first. Abuse is secondary, especially if you're taking care of your kids. Secondly, lack of information. Do women know where they need to go if they have to report a case? Also, some of them think that they'll be arrested if they leave the house if it's not an essential activity that they're engaged in. No access to cell phones or airtime, and they have to physically leave their homes. They have to go to a police station. They need transport money in many cases, so that's a barrier. Then there's fears that relate to reporting. Am I going to get COVID? And then the SAPS assistance is a little bit uneven in terms of referral pathways, and there aren't always victim-friendly rooms available, etc. I need to say at the same time, though, the interesting part is throughout the rest of the world, we have found that gender-based violence has increased significantly under lockdown. It increased by over 30% in Japan. It increased by hundreds of times in the UK. And here we have a decrease, possibly for the factors listed above. But it is also possible that owing to the very particular circumstances in South Africa, that gender-based violence is very, very often correlated to alcohol. And owing to the restricted access to alcohol, this may have had a positive impact in terms of the number of reports. So trying to take those two factors and figure out what's what is really difficult to do. We did do some research and we don't have a definitive answer yet, and we'll be following up. Next slide. So the question is, what do we do then? What are the interventions we engage in after lockdown or even during lockdown? So firstly, to indicate that there's a very well established reporting arrangements between the national hotline that you can report to. The SAPS in the province also has a special unit. Colonel Paulso is the head of it, and he liaises with the Department of Social Development. Social Development has a point person on GBV, and then there's a range of NGOs that provide shelters. And together they work to ensure that information gets to women about who they can report to, and there's a very particular protocol for if you do report gender-based violence, how you can be assisted. So a lot of work has happened in lockdown on this. As indicated above, women are more likely to report to NGOs or to the police or to use informal channels. They have been using, in some cases, soup kitchens or churches. So the hotline in the command center is not utilized extensively. And I've noted the different barriers. So there is the two objectives in the future is we definitely want to get more reports of gender-based violence. There's absolutely no doubt that there's an underreporting. We just don't know the extent of it. We also need to start changing the negative social norms around gender and around gender-based violence. So this starts to head towards behavioral change. Then lastly, in terms of evidence-based interventions, do some mass media messaging to investigate this idea of a red line that Amara can elaborate on in terms of tolerated behavior, in terms of GBV. Gender sensitivity training, for example, all of the officers who have been deployed by the city should, be getting gender sensitivity training, and to enrich referral pathways and unblock barriers. So, for example, if you have a youth in trouble in a school, do you have a referral pathway to counseling and to possibly a different school environment to assist them to not to end up in a life of crime, but have a more productive pathway? So those are all parts of the safety plan. On to the last slide. So the way forward is that our overall objective remains exactly the same, halving the murder rate in 10 years. The priority police stations will definitely continue to be a focus because lockdown has shown us they are still equally a problem. Post-COVID, the law enforcement officers in the city will be deployed again through data-led and evidence-based strategies that we talked about. Then as part of the COVID recovery phase, safety is critical so we can recover and build back better. So what we foresee is that when we establish the area-based teams, previously we wanted to focus on safety. Now we want to focus on creating a stable environment so that recovery can happen. So it is already shifting the way in which we're thinking about the work of the area-based teams. And then lastly, there are the two key themes that we as a province really want to pursue vigorously. The one is alcohol harms reduction, and I think HOD Morris spoke extensively about that, as well as gender-based violence. And that's it for us. Thanks.
Thank you very much to Dr. Fast and to Mr. Morris for the presentation. Members, I'm going to go straight into questions. Can I just get an indication of who would like to ask questions? If you could indicate by raising your hand or in the chat group. I see Honourable Marais.
Yes, thank you so much, Chairperson.
All right, Honourable Marais, if you can just give me one, if you just give me 1 second. So it's Honourable Marais, Honourable Allen, and then Honourable Kama. Thank you, Honourable Marais.
Yes, I believe there's a joint command here headed by the Premier with the City of Cape Town. Do you take responsibility what happens with enforcement of the lockdowns? And if you do take responsibility, what have you done about this young man who was killed by Metro policemen in Ravensmead with a hammer during lockdown? Mr. Michels, I believe his surname was. Have you had an investigation into this, and what have you done? Are your personnel, which you've trained, properly and sufficiently trained to prevent a causa happening in the Western Cape, who was killed by the army? Are we going to see more of these killings in the Western Cape to enforce? That's my question number one. My question number two, I asked this question before. I didn't get a real answer. I said, why, if there's cases of gender-based violence, which a woman reports, do you remove the woman from the safety of her home with the children and put her somewhere and leave the husband in the house to enjoy the house? But she hasn't got the benefit of enjoying being in her own home. You remove her. I said, remove the scoundrel. Put him somewhere in a tent. Let him go and sleep there. And they had all sorts of legal restraints that they can't do this because of this law and that law and this constitutional provision. But the regulation shows that ministers run roughshod over the Bill of Rights. And the courts had to reprimand them for doing that. Now, why can't regulations then address the issue? Who should be moved out of a house if a woman is beaten up and the children by a drunk husband? Why must she and the children be removed to a place of safety instead of this drunken husband? I would like to know answers to that and whether it can be addressed. Then, do you really understand the ghetto culture? I want to ask, or how things happen there. Are we addressing problems in these ghetto areas as we would address a problem in Constantia and in Bishop's Court, where the lifestyles are totally different, tolerance levels totally different, and access to lawyers and have telephones and cell phones to report matters quickly? Do we assume this woman has a cell phone, that she has airtime to report it, that she has access to the social media to complain if she's being abused in a house? Do you understand the ghetto culture? I come from that culture as a young boy, as a child. It doesn't operate the way Constantia, Bishop's Court and Plattekloof operates. It's totally different. I want you to address that. You say you want to halve. In 10 years' time, you're going to halve the crime. In 10 years' time? Please give me figures how many people will be killed in 10 years' time while you're dragging your feet over a 10-year period. We want this to be done quicker. Have you got a plan? And what is that plan? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Marais. Honourable Allen.
Thank you, Chairperson. I wonder if Mitchell's Plain is part of the ghetto where I'm from, but I'm delighted by the presentation. I wanted to, regarding the measures and the interventions, is obviously welcomed in terms of addressing the barriers to reporting domestic violence, and I would be keen to hear in the near future regarding its impact. But to ask my questions, firstly, if we can get an indication of how successful are LEAP officers in assisting communities by addressing crime outside of the COVID-19 response, that would be my first question. But also in understanding that reducing and preventing violence and crime calls for that holistic approach, that whole society approach, and many of it will be long-term. And during the slides, we heard that there is the safety priorities and it's across certain spheres and law enforcement, but I wanted to check whether any steps have been taken in regard to the bullet points that were listed in that one. But then a more direct one would be in terms of community safety assisting neighborhood watches, if we can get an update on the latest in assisting neighborhood watches, specifically what's the plans and has it been rolled out in provision of the mask and the sanitizers, and if we can get an understanding of what is the possible number that will be allowed to operate within the hotspot areas. And then just lastly, Chairperson, in terms of the medical hotspots and the crime hotspots, I heard there was one question. There was one remark about, I think it's HOD Morris, that mentioned it is done in conjunction or coordinated by SAPS. What is the extent of that? Because you become aware of that at times there's only law enforcement and no SAPS, for example. But if we can get an understanding of what happens or what is meant exactly by coordination in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Allen. Honourable Kama.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and let me also welcome the presentation. My first question, Chair, will be on slide 7. I understand and agree with Dr. Fast that some of these safety priorities would be affected by the current lockdown. But I want to ask, because there are some like supporting families at risk, and the identifying, assessing, and support youth at risk. I would like to get progress around that as to what is it that we are doing now, because I think when you say youth at risk, it's quite broad. You also talking about them because they are unemployed, they're sitting at home, and therefore being the first targets to be recruited in gang activities and all that. The other question, Chair, in passing, I see on slide 8 at the bottom it's indicated that the first safety cabinet was on the 19th and the second one was meant to be on the 8th but could not take place because of COVID-19. I want to check, has that been, has it now since then set, or is there a date that is being eyed? Because understanding that they still have work to do even though we are in the lockdown. The other question, Chair, that I have is on slide 11. I see, Chair, when the plan was announced, it was announced as a 1 billion rand plan with 3,000 new law enforcement officers that will be deployed. But according to this slide, I see that there's only going to be 8,000. I want to check, has that changed from what was announced? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honourable Kama. Members, I'm going to allow for a second round, but I think there's quite a bit of questions raised. So I'm going to hand over straight to Premier and to Minister if you would like to get the first bite at the cherry, and then DG, I will hand over to you, and then you can redirect to the officials that you deem that should respond to those questions. Thank you. Premier?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll attempt a couple of them and then I'll hand over to Minister Fritz. And then, as you said, I think first of all, the Honourable Murray, thank you very much for the questions. He asked, the first question was around about who's in control during lockdown. Well, we must know that lockdown is a national declaration. It's a disaster declaration, and in actual fact, what happens is the NAT joints and the PROF joints take over. So that is the SAPS and the military. But of course, what we did was we aligned our support, which would have been from the province, our traffic officials, plus indirectly through the city, our LEAP officers. And I'm sure Mr. Morris, HOD Morris, can add further to that. Then you asked some questions about some of the officials and whether disciplinary action or what has happened. I'm not sure. I can't answer that, but definitely give you the detail, or either that or through the department, we'll get that detail on exactly what happened with the case that you've just asked. I'm not sure who's going to be able to answer the question about why someone was not left in the house. And then you said, and this is where I must maybe start off by saying, I'm sure, Honourable Maria, you've been around long enough that the criminal justice system is not within the constitutional mandate of a province. In actual fact, our job is one of oversight. So DOC's really supposed to just have an oversight role, but if you remember, a year ago when coming in to this sixth government of the province. We said that we're going to go further than just the oversight. And that's why we've had to find ways in which to get extra law enforcement officers on the ground, because we have too few police officers altogether, 20,000 police officers. And we need more because we have a lower police officer to population ratio. And of course, we have a higher murder rate. And then this plan, you said, well, have you got a plan? Well, this is the plan. This is the plan, the whole of society plan that we put together. That's not only just about boots on the ground, but it's about economic development. It's about every single department, and it's all in that plan. That is the plan. And you know, there's no such thing as a quick fix. I mean, the way you spoke, it was if we could stop the murder rate in the next 2 years and it would be done. Well, you know, unfortunately, and all the research that we've done around the world, this is a long-term project. And of course, I think some of the stuff that we're picking up in many places around the world who are starting to get things right, we're learning from them and then applying them to this process so that it becomes every single department's play a role. And you could see that in the dashboard presentation of what it's like when we have the safety cabinet, and every department reports back on what their department is doing. So if it's economic development, you know, they've got tourism safety, but they've also got economic development in an area that perhaps is highly high gangsterism and murder. But if you start to move in the boots on the ground, you've also got to make sure you have the economic response at the same time. And so it would mean the same thing for every department. Then the Honourable Allen, I think, yeah, you spoke about the LEAP. I think I'll leave that and the neighbourhood watches to Minister Fritz. A big thing now is your point about the medical or crime hotspot response. And during lockdown, many of our LEAP officers were joined up to help with the lockdown, and we are now seeing that they need to come back to the hotspots. I mean, there's a discussion was happening today with the city. I've actually just messaged Minister Fritz. We've been talking about it. I mean, the thing that distresses me is to see how the gangster shootings have come back so quickly, and we need to get that deployment happening as soon as possible. The Honourable Karma, thank you very much for your questions. I think also youth at risk, COVID-19, what I put, Prof. Joints. But I think from my point, I'll leave that to Minister Fritz. I think the question that I'm going to answer specifically is the one around the 3,000, and you see the 1,000. Obviously, what we have to do is we've got to go and motivate in the budgets every year to the increased number, because you remember when we budgeted for the first time, we actually had to go and find savings to get it going. So we've still got to go through a budget process so we can add extra numbers. I'm going to tell you right now, I must be honest with you, it's going to be tough because we're already seeing massive cuts coming in budgets. But this is a main priority of this government. So all I will say to you is that when we go into the adjustment process, I will make sure that I'm in that as well, and this will be front and center, seeing as it's a main goal of this government. But of course, we've got to get it passed through the budgetary processes before we can put it into the line items. Chair, I'm going to hand over to Minister Fritz.
Thank you. Thank you, Premier. Minister.
Thank you, Premier. And I'm going to just I just want to make a couple of broad comments, and then I'll ask some of our officials to operationally respond to most of the questions that pertains to us. But I really want to say, and you make a very, very important point. This province pushed almost the constitutional envelope by saying, listen, we can't just say that we are sitting watching the crime going up and we are just spectators, we're just going to do oversight. We actually jumped into the fire to actually see what we can do. And I think under your leadership, Premier, I really think that was the approach. So we never ever say we can't do this. We even meet with judges in their case flow management meeting to see how we can assist and where can we, assist with getting court safety safety back. Remember, the gangs even went into courts, and one judge had to be had to be saved or rescued out of a court sitting. So that is one example. But the point we are making is that our approach, and we've always said, and in fact, Premier Winnie made this point very, very clear. When COVID came, he said, don't take your foot off the accelerator, Honorable Marais, in the gang hotspot areas. Because what the gangsters, as you know, they are very clever. They will, when they see here's a space to a vacuum, they jump and fall in that. We've seen it with food distribution, how they looted the trucks. We've seen it with the illicit cigarettes at the moment, how they are now running that economy. Because our clever central government always creates an alternative economy for these illegal, illegitimate structures. But to come back to a very specific point around neighborhood watches, and I'm going to ask HOD perhaps to just also deal with this. We have all the time, and I must remind the Honourable Member Kamba that remember, neighborhood watches were not allowed to patrol. Some clever people in Pretoria decided that neighborhood watches should not, and therefore we have seen in burglaries increase. I'm happy to say I've just written, and in fact I just responded to a letter from the General Matakata, who just wrote to indicate that neighborhood watches off, and that's now official. It's just confirmed it in a letter to us, and so we're very happy that they are back, and that they just need a permit from the entity that kind of authority entity that deals with them. So that will continue. We will make sure that no one will go out without any PPEs. We will also ask, because many of these neighborhood watch members are sometimes 70 years old, sometimes they have comorbidities. If they have that, not to go out, we will ask them and request them not to, and to really, because this is nowhere did any regulation say that we have stopped the idea of people congregating. So meetings are still not allowed, but they will assist in school safety. They will assist where people at SASSA payouts, supermarkets, all of that. Many times people ask, where's the police? The neighborhood watchers can now assist with that. And then finally, I just want to say, I think we have seen, again, the link between alcohol, as the DG indicated in his introductory remarks, this huge impact of alcohol on violence, and what the kind of result of just the sale of alcohol from the 1st to the 7th. We have seen, one figure of the police is 118, but we know it's about 134 people that was murdered. We really need to look differently without closing the economy. Not for 1 minute are we suggesting to close the economy, but we really need to get that balance straight. And I know National like to talk about, yes, we're trying to target the poor areas, the Sabines and that, but it is unfortunately also many of those Sabines operating that causes the murder rate to go. And I'm talking about unlicensed Sabines and taverns. So I will hand over to the HOD and any official who are the experts on neighborhood watch operations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman Dalen Mitchell, Honourable Mitchell.
Thank you, Minister. But before we hand over to the DG, I see, Premier, you raised your hand. Is there something that you would like to add?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I forgot on the Honourable Karma's one question I forgot to answer. That was on the safety cabinet. And yes, I very much would like to get those safety cabinets back up and running again. It has been pretty hectic with 3 cabinets a week at the moment, and with a total focus on dealing with COVID-19. But as soon as we have got a system running properly and a gap that I definitely want to, in the next couple of weeks, get our next safety cabinet up and running, because you need to set this. This is about a collaboration where you have a space where national government, provincial government, local government come together. We've already got it right between SAPs coming into the system, I think that basically the criminal justice system has already agreed to be part of this. So I think that's a great step forward. And we've even had requests from deputy ministers at a national level to also join the safety cabinet. So I really would like to get it going sooner rather than later. and would have liked to have had it going all the way through. But I think in the next few weeks, we definitely will get them back up and running and on a regular basis.
All right, thank you, Premier. DG, over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Next to the Premier's just to indicate to this committee that, I mean, at the moment, Cabinet meets 3 times a week. In fact, initially we started 3 times. We're now meeting on a Tuesday and on a Friday.
So, my apologies, DG, for interrupting. Honourable Marais, is that a point of order?
Yes, I could hear nothing. I hear every 4th word the DG has said. I would like to hear everything he says. I couldn't hear. There's some interference, please, sir.
Okay, thank you, Honourable Marais. DG, if you could please start over. Members, can I please ask that all participants on this meeting, can you please mute your microphones?
Chair, can I just check in? Honourable Marais, hear me now?
Thank you so much. I hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much. Chair, let me then start again. Just to remind the members of this committee that given the COVID requirements, Cabinet initially started to meet 3 times a week formally, and then plus the Sunday meetings. We now meet twice a week, Tuesday and on a Friday, and then every Sunday, and those meetings have now been shifted to a Monday. Premier actually gets together with the Cabinet to deal with the entire COVID response. And why I'm starting there is to connect to the point that Premier made around the Safety Cabinet. Now, the 21 priority areas in terms of the safety plan is set out on slide 7. And I think Member Kama raised the issue. And if we go in and look at what are those priorities, some of those things we are dealing with currently also under the COVID umbrella, and understandably, some of those things are not happening at the moment. Like as an example, safety at schools. During the period, I mean, all the schools, etc., were closed. But as part of the COVID-19 cabinet meetings, we've got a specific stream dealing with law enforcement. And in fact, in that meeting, we've got the provincial commissioner dialing in, and we've got the entire safety cluster, including the city of Cape Town, dialing into that discussion. And part of it is like HOD Gideon has presented. If there's an issue with an increasing rate in the murders, if there's an issue, based on the issues on alcohol, it actually gets raised in that meeting, and we use those meetings to actually up our game and respond to the issues of crime within communities, and it actually includes the murder rate. So every week since February, since the start of COVID, we've actually monitored what happened to the murder rate, and therefore Gideon Morris, HOD Morris, could actually demonstrate to the committee what has actually happened. And as soon as the lockdown was lifted, particularly to level 3, we saw the spike and increases in the murder rate. And I mean, our main plan is actually to halve the murder rate over a period of 10 years. So why I'm trying to bring that to the committee is to show that, notwithstanding the fact that we didn't have the formal safety cabinet meetings, we've never taken our focus off the issue around the murder rate, around crime, around the impact of crime on our emergency centers, etc. So I hope, Member Kama, that explains how we've gone about, but the Premier has also given the commitment that we will restart, or actually get the safety cabinet meetings going to specifically talk about the 21 priority areas. But again, I want to reassure you, that we actually focusing on our stuff, and that is why we are so passionate about keeping to our goal of halving the murder rate over a period of 10 years. Then that then deals with the issues of Member Kama in relation to slide 7 as well as on slide 8. I'm sure that Gideon can talk to the success of the LEAP officers. The issue around the hotspots, Member Allen, that is integral, also connected to our own response now as part of COVID. And I think Dr. Fast can maybe talk a little bit more, around what we're doing with regards to the priority stations. And then lastly, Chair, the question that was raised by Member Marais on particularly the approach to gender-based violence, and why women and children are removed and not the perpetrator per se. We can always formally respond to that, but I will also ask the Department of Social Development maybe to provide us with a response in relation to that. So, Chair, I'm going to ask firstly Dr. Fast to maybe comment on some of the stuff, and then I'm going to ask Gideon Morris to maybe just talk on one or two of the issues, and then we can continue with if there are any further questions. Hildegard?
Yes, thanks very much. I think, in fact, that Premier and DG have covered most of the questions that I otherwise might have addressed, but I'd like to just ask Amaro Martinez to come in here and just provide a perspective on the Honourable Murray's question on gender-based violence. Amaro?
Sure. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Hildegard. And good afternoon to all the members. Just on Honourable Murray's question on GBV. So yes, this is a very important point that you're making. Sometimes what happens is that does in fact happen. So the perpetrator might be taken out of the household, either sent to the local SAP station or sent to family. So what previously has happened is that what we find is that if a perpetrator is removed and the person then goes to a SAP station, he may be sitting in a police cell for the weekend, for example. But because the justice system does actually work very slowly, it does mean that that person is reintegrated back into the place with his victim. And so what then happens is a cycle where actually the victim is then actually placed with the perpetrator again. So this really goes against what we're actually trying to do to keep a victim safe. But I do completely agree with you. There is no reason why the perpetrator cannot be removed. So this is definitely something that we are looking at together with the Department of Social Development, who has the mandate to actually see how we can look at and eradicate this type of problem. Thank you.
So I think it would now be Mr. Morris who could respond to any of the other outstanding questions.
Thank you, Chairperson, DG. So I think there are just three issues. The first one is, as the Premier requested, in terms of a bit more detail on the Joint Operational Command Center, or the PROFJOC as we call it. The PROFJOC was activated immediately when the state of disaster was announced. It is chaired by General Lincoln from the South African Police Service and Admiral Dlamini from the South African National Defence Force. The PROFJOC remains activated on a 24/7 basis. We are part of that, and we have attended and dealt with all the debriefings. So that's the overall command structure. I think the question on the
HOD, my apologies, HOD,
Sorry,
for interrupting. I see Honourable Murray's hand. Is that a point of order? Honourable Murray?
Not a point of order. The hand doesn't want to go down. I don't know what's wrong. I've clicked.
Okay, it's fine, Honourable Murray. I will lower your hand on your behalf. HOD?
Thank you. Thank you.
My apologies, HOD.
No. Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I didn't notice that. I think the second question that I have to respond to is asked by Honourable Member Allen about the neighbourhood watches in terms of numbers. Sir, all neighbourhood watches have been activated. We can, however, only report on those that are credited in terms of Section 6 of the Western Cape Community Safety Act, and those totaled 363 structures with some 14,000 members. We have also activated, especially the neighbourhood watches within the hotspot, the medical hotspot areas. We have worked out a comprehensive program in terms of their participation and assistance with the cleanliness of public spaces, as well as the maintenance of social distancing. And we will be able to give more detail once Minister has approved on the detail of that. And I think then just my last comment also, Chair, is please, when we look at the activities, especially of the gangs over the last 2 or 3 weeks, we have to factor in the historic fact that once we start releasing big numbers of people on parole, this is almost inevitable. And we are dealing here with also the lack of reintegration of many of these habitual criminals and how they are reintegrated in the community. So I think we are set to see for at least a few weeks to come, and it will have to take extra focus in terms of law enforcement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, HOD. Members, before I go over to a second round, can I ask if there's any member that, as a follow-up on any of the questions posed now, I will allow that, or if you feel that any of your questions have not yet been answered, can you just give me an indication? All right, if there's no indication for follow-ups on that round, we'll go over to a second round of questions. Are there any members that would like to ask a question? I see Honourable Philander, Honourable Kama.
May I proceed, Chair?
And yes, you may.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Minister Fritz did touch on it. Thank you very much, Minister. The issue relating to crime in general, what the impact of the alcohol ban lifting has been in the Western Cape on crime. Also, Chairperson, what is the role of the Liquor Authority in this instance? And then also, Chairperson, should the situation worsen, is there any plan by the department or the Premier to ask that this ban be reinstituted in the Western Cape? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Philander, Honourable Kama, and Honourable Murray.
Thank you very much, Chair. And let me also welcome the responses that have been given so far. My question, Chair, would then be on slide 9. I just wanted to check, and apologies if I missed it, if all the area-based teams have been established in the high crime areas. The other question I have, Chair, it's around, I think, slide 23, as it relates to the gender-based violence. Chair, what I want to get from the department, or what I want to see is what are we doing within this safety plan, or what is our deliberate effort to fight gender-based violence as informed by the plan? Because on slide 23, the increase, because the challenge is correctly as identified, is that there's a less reporting of gender-based violence. Now, here it's raised as 2 possible objectives for future purposes. Does that mean that there's no work we're doing now to encourage reporting of gender-based violence and all other efforts in that regard? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Kama. Honourable Murray.
Thank you.
Honourable Murray, I think we lost you. Honourable Murray, we lost that first part.
Yeah.
No, it's.
I do not know whether the response about removing the perpetrator instead of the victim was given by this the department or finance department. Last time I got a very different.
Honourable Murray, my apologies for interrupting you. I think the audio is a bit distorted, so if you could just repeat your question.
The response. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. I can hear you now.
Right. The response to my question about locking up or removing the perpetrator, I will first of all want to know whether that came from the department of Mr. Fritz or Minister Philander, Fernandez, because I'm very heartened by that response. I personally had to take a family, I had to go to the Magistrates Court in Cape Town to get an order against a landlord who came to collect his rent during the lockdown, wanted to evict people without a court order, and very abusive. These are all instances of violence against women who stay alone at home. The violence don't only come from their husbands, it comes from women who live alone in the home, they tenants, and landlord coming there and enforcing himself onto these women. We could have a plan. When I said, what is your plan? I want to know if there is a hotline for these women, a hotline, a gender-based hotline to report this. The second thing, what have we learned about the drop in murders and gunshots during the lockdown? What have we learned which would make it very, very possible to suspend certain parts of the Constitution if need be to protect our young people from being killed and shot? What can we learn from this? I know we're living in a liberal society where people have absolute freedom, but absolutely what have we learned? So many young people get killed every day, every week in the townships through gunshots. And since the lockdown, you didn't hear guns. The people were shouting hallelujah at last. And now when we go back to level 3, whatever we're going to go back to, what plan have we got in place that we don't go back to the Wild West situation in Manenberg, Bonteheuwel, and all these places where every day you hear gunshots? What is the plan against this?
Right. Thank you, Honourable Marais. Members, are there any further questions in this round? Okay, if not, I'm going to hand over to Minister Premier for the first, if you would like to respond to any of these questions raised, and then DJ, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. Okay, so the first one that I would talk to is the question that the Honourable Philander asked around the alcohol. And so on yesterday, we had a presentation on the impact of alcohol on our trauma units. And you could definitely see level lockdown 5, you could see definitely a slowdown in alcohol-fueled trauma. Then you could see it when the levels started opening up. You can definitely see how that those trauma rooms and beds are taken up. We're at 50. Let's say we dropped by 100 points or 100 beds. We've come back not 100, but we've come back 50%. So we've agreed. Now move on to your second part of your question: is what is it? Would we ask for a full lockdown again, etc.? We haven't made any decision in that line as yet, but we have definitely looked at it. It's pointless having all of this expenditure to try and save beds for COVID-19 patients, and then they get taken up by alcohol abuse and trauma. So we definitely will be watching it closely. We'll have a further discussion on Friday on it, and we're monitoring and measuring it at the moment. We also will now. We had the alcohol game changer, and we'll see what we can learn from there to implement now, and also put some communication in place to try to get some behavioral change happening. But we definitely are monitoring it very closely. We know it has a huge impact. The second point that I will refer to in the Honourable Marais, and that is gender-based hotline. Yes. 0800 150 150. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Premier. Minister, is there anything that you would like to add?
Yes, thanks. I need to speak to I think it was also just Wendy's point, and I think Premier really answered quite a bit of it. But to answer Honourable Marais and Wendy together, I think what we have seen is that there are new ways possibly to deal with the kind of massive murder rates. In fact, with the kind of lifting of the sale of the ban on the sale of alcohol, for a lack of a better word, we have seen from the 1st to the 7th of June. Remember, it was open from the 1st of June. We have seen the murder rate go back to 118. That's a conservative figure. We think the figure is far higher. It's actually 130 something. And I'm talking about actual death bodies that's related to sharp instruments, by shooting and by blunt instruments. No? Someone hitting you over the head with a club. So I'm just making that point. So we're looking at that very, very seriously. I think the Premier spoke about the Hello, can you hear me, Honourable Marais? Honourable Marais, can you hear me? Mr. Chair, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, yes, Minister, can continue. We can hear you.
I think Mr. Marais perhaps he's in bad Wi-Fi, the weather. And then I think the last point I just want to talk to Honourable Chairperson is the gender-based issue. And I think what as Ms. Amora indicated around the gender-based violence, we must continue to also, Mr. Marais, be able to give people, because you know the reality as you indicated about some of our townships. You try and remove that man. He's so powerful. You can bring the police, whatever. But we must have the ability to be able to say that they can get into, they have access to any shelter. And I'm talking about gender-based shelters. We have excellent gender-based shelters. Remember, I used to be in social development, and I can promise you a safe haven. But as you say, we need to look at how do you deal with the offending male in the situation. I think that's basically that the kind of issues that I would answer. If the officials want to add anything, thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Minister. DG?
Chair, no, thank you very much. I mean, I want to connect again to what the Premier said. I mean, if Member Marais goes onto our website, in addition to the number that the Premier has indicated, I mean, right up front on our website, if you need any help, and it includes gender-based violence, you can also call 0860 142 142, and you will be directed depending on whatever help you need. On the issue of gender-based violence, again, Member Marais, if you again go to our website and you go to the priorities of Minister Fernandez, you will see that her own focus areas, particularly within her first 100 days of office, in fact, it's the #1 focus area, will include gender-based violence. If you can recall, Member Marais, the first week of December, we actually had a big effort there on the ground floor at 7 and 15 Wells Street. And during that pronouncement, Minister Fernandez also indicated that we're not only going to dedicate the month of December, that particular 10 days, to gender-based violence, but that we're going to have our programs run throughout the year. Because obviously gender-based violence is not just an issue, that we need to focus on during the year. And as Minister Fritz has indicated, who comes from the Department of Social Development, it's actually part of the mainstream programs. So we've got social workers working in this space. Part of our safety plan is also to look at it, because it's also about addressing behavior, pushing the agenda around behavior change, and then also the issue around particularly, displaying a good example, particularly to our boys. So I hope that more or less takes care of it. And I mean, if there's any further information, Chair, on this, I would gladly ask the HOD of social development, maybe in a different session, maybe just to make a presentation on what are those things that we're doing to address the issue around gender-based violence. And I mean, Premier's also, I think Premier's indicated that between himself and myself, we've actually met with the gender commissioner, you know, the one that's also responsible, you know, for the province, plus also the national one, and we've actually outlined our own plans, and Minister Fernandez is the lead, you know, on behalf of this government for dealing with the issues of gender based violence. Then the issues that were raised by Member Karma, particularly in relation to you know, our own initiatives in relation to slide 23, and what are we actually doing, you know, from in terms of putting a deliberate effort there to reduce, you know, violent and crime. I mean, what we're doing currently in this space is we've actually upped our communication, you know, and not only spending money from a communication perspective on COVID, but also trying to address some of the other issues that are happening within communities, and particularly the initiatives from the Department of Social Development. I will allow Dr. Fast just to talk about the area-based teams and where they've been established and where they've not been established. And then Gideon, if you can just touch on particularly the role of the Liquor Authority, you know, in relation to the matters raised by Member Philander, and then also obviously the linking to crime, which you've already presented. And I mean, I don't know whether you would like to express a view, you know, on this whole issue around the ban. But I mean, the key point that I wanted to say is that we're taking it serious as a government, and that is why we've done the analysis, and we're actually presenting it here to you today because we can see the causal relationship between the two. You can even go back to some of the policy documents that we've developed. That's also available on our website. So if you go to the right-hand side of our website, you will see all the work that we've done, particularly in relation to alcohol harms, etc., because we understand that there's a relationship. But the question is, what can we do from a policy perspective to actually address some of these challenges that actually currently exist within our communities. So Hildegard, if you can just respond to the area-based teams, and then I'll hand over straight to Gideon, Chair, if you're okay.
Sure,
Thank
thanks,
you very
DG.
much.
So the area-based teams have been constituted. So we asked the city and SAPS to identify people who could be part of the teams. Just to give you an idea of the sorts of people we want to be on the teams, we want people from the city and urban management. So we want to have integrated teams in terms of law enforcement and violence prevention and also urban services. So if you can imagine, if you have a particular area and you're finding that there's a few derelict buildings and gangsters are using that as their base and so forth, then obviously the city of Cape Town would have a role to play in terms of dealing with that particular derelict building. Then if it's an issue about referral pathways, we were talking before about youth at risk and how are we assisting them during this time, there will be additional social workers that are deployed. So we're going to have, as I say, we've constituted the committee, so we know who's going to be on them, but no sooner did we constitute them than COVID hit and the law enforcement officers were deployed to various areas for COVID purposes. And so we've decided not to activate them until such time as we feel comfortable that the COVID situation has stabilized and the DEEP officers are redeployed back to the areas that they were supposed to be in. We are constituting the teams in the sort of on a continuous rollout. I think it was mentioned there's the first 500. The next 500 will be appointed in the next few months. So in other words, we can't focus on every area. The areas that we're focusing on in the next 3 months to constitute these teams and make them active will be in Delft, in Khayelitsha, and in Philippi. That includes Hanover Park. So at the moment, we have them on paper. We haven't activated them because just as we did so, all the law enforcement teams were deployed and everyone's activities went in that particular direction. Thanks.
Chairperson, if I may.
Yes, HOD, over to you.
I think just as the DG asked that I just comment on the involvement of the Liquor Authority following the question of Honourable Member Philander. So at the request of Minister Fritz, we immediately arranged that the Liquor Authority be incorporated in the Prof. JOC structure and all the arrests that was made at the police roadblocks of people that transported or that sold big volumes of alcohol. The liquor inspectors then tracked the alcohol back to the supplier, and we then opened the case before the Liquor License Tribunal in order to look at the revoking of the license of those. We dealt with 62 cases, Chairperson, and currently there are 32 licenses that have been revoked because of a result of that exercise. We will continue then with the investigation of the other matters because, as we know, Chairperson, the alcohol was supplied by legal outlets deliberately, knowingly selling and providing illegal. So there are consequences being managed on that. I think in terms of the DG's also question on other means, of course, there is the regulatory improvements, but I think also then conversation with the police in order to, as we've now seen, restricted trading Mondays to Thursdays, 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. But Chairperson, we need to also pull those restrictions through to the transport of alcohol. Otherwise, the alcohol is still being transported over the weekends to restock and so forth, and that is having a big impact. But that we'll consult with as we go forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, HOD. Members, are there any follow-ups to any of the questions posed? Or if you feel that a question has not yet been responded to? Just get an indication.
Covered. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Philander. Okay, if not, I'm going to open for a last round of questions. Is there any member that would like to ask any new questions? Okay, if not, Premier, I'm going to, if you would like to make any closing remarks, I'll first hand over to you and then to Minister Fritz.
Thank you very much. I mean, I know that we always say it, this is a serious priority of ours, and it really does distress me to see how quickly things, we benefited from certain actions that gave us even better insights as to what happens around alcohol-fueled trauma, and even slowing down the gangster shootings and murders. But of course, this is a major priority. We'll learn from those, and we've got to now learn and implement even further. And perhaps if I can just add one other thing to what HOD Morris was talking about around the Liquor Authority and legislation. And the committee needs to know this. We want to try and bring some legislative changes that are quick, low-hanging fruit, that are not going to be long constitutional kind of hearings, but tweakings, etc., to the liquor legislation. There was an idea to do a major, big one, but let's rather bring some quick fixes that we can right now to the standing committee. We would obviously have to go out to comment first, get it to you as quickly as we can, so that we can maybe make some changes from the learnings, and then of course still continue with the bigger changes to the Act on refining and tweaking. So I think that's just something that's going to be coming up in the future. But other than that, can I just say thank you very much to Minister Fritz, to DG and the team, for all that they do in making sure that this safety team continue to meet throughout. We might have been disrupted here and there, but the meetings continue, and we will endeavour to get that safety cabinet up and running as soon as we can.
Thank you, Premier. Minister Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must start off by saying thank you to we can call the Premier the President. To Premier, and I want to say to DG and to Dr. Hildegard first, that whole team, HOD Morris, and I really want to say to every single member of that team, the amazing work that they've done is not going unnoticed. And what they are doing, the DG runs in front of everyone. He dirties his hands right there in the kind of trenches, and I think I really want to say to all of them that we really notice and acknowledge the fight, not only of crime. Remember the COVID link also all of it, the whole complexity of the whole situation, everyone and the whole team, the Western Cape government team, our officials are amazing, Mr. Chairperson. And I really want to say to all of them, thank you. I want to say to members that we will continue to all the time examine and look at innovative ways of dealing with all these kind of social issues that creeps up at any given point. You know, we have now seen the fact that a whole lot of children are at home in certain communities like Tafelsig. We are now seeing the stone throwing re-emerging in that, the gang of their little apprenticeship of gangsterism. And again, as the Department of Safety, we already moved in via our Chrysalis outreach program to stop that kind of practice. So I want to say, we all the time looking at all our avenues to also focus on crime prevention, to focus on behavior change, so that you don't need to get anyone to first become a gangster and then try and stop it. Stop children from becoming gangsters. I think this is the point that I want to make and that a number of members made today. And so I want to say thank you to the committee for inviting us here today. Thanks very much, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Minister, Premier. On behalf of the committee, allow me an opportunity to thank you, Premier, Minister, the DG, Dr. Foss and HOD Morris, and all other officials that was part of this meeting today. Thank you very much for the manner in which we could conduct this oversight, and thank you for the manner in which you have allowed us and responded to the questions posed by the various members. Premier, Minister and officials, you are more than welcome to exit the meeting now. Members, we will remain behind to just do some committee admin, but once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, honourable members. Thanks, team.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Cheers, bye.
The DG.
All right. Thank you very much, members, for that engagement. On the agenda, we have the draft minutes of the meeting of Tuesday, the 17th of March, which I would like to table for adoption. I'm going to table page 1. Are there any edits or amendments? Page 2, any edits or amendments? If no edits or amendments, I table the minutes of the 17th of March for adoption.
Chairperson Regan Allen, I move to adopt.
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honourable Allen and Philander. The minutes have been adopted. Okay, members, that's the only committee admin that was on the agenda. So I'm going to go straight over to any resolutions stemming from this meeting that we just had. Are there any resolutions or information requested from the various departments? Okay, it seems that there's no resolutions from this meeting. So allow me an opportunity to thank the procedural officer and the senior procedural officers that assisted with this committee. Thank you very much to IT. Thank you very much, members. If there's nothing else, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you very much, Chair.